Can everybody? Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you taking some time out your day to talk about the most exciting topic there could be, police accountability, right? Um, but I want to first let you know that we're going to end at 5. I have a client coming in that I have to meet with at 5 o'clock. And so I apologize.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
Okay, so we have a short agenda today because a lot has been going on, and I just want to make sure that we're not overloading what we can do. I'm really excited about the possibility of us being able to meet in person with the community to kind of go over a lot of the work that we completed last year, that we just really haven't had an opportunity to kind of, I really want to say, digest and process to help guide how we move forward with the accountability committee. So I just want to start by saying that first. And again, thanking you for being here. I don't know everyone on the call, so if you could just briefly say your name, and if there's a group that you're working with, that would be great. We can start anywhere.
Hi, I'm James Egan. I'm with the lot. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt someone. I'm with the lot work group.
Thank you.
I'm Ryan Walker. I'm staff at the CPC.
Thanks, Ryan.
Dave Lima with Surge Northeast Ohio chapter.
I'm Samantha Montanez. I'm also with the lot work group that's under the CPC.
All right, sounds good. And someone named Daisy, so you can type in the chat too if you're unable to speak. So just to give an overview, because there are a couple of people who've not joined us before, the work that we've done with the Accountability Committee has been years in the making. And Dave can chime in at any time because he's been consistently a part of the CPC and of the Accountability Committee since its inception. When this committee was initially developed, our goal was focused on how do we measure the effectiveness of the reform process, specifically relating to the impact in the community. How can community members identify that there have been meaningful and sustainable changes within this process that isn't just about what's the discipline or who got fired or what new trainings or policies have we developed. And to that pursuit, we've really been focused on a couple of key areas that the community identified as most important to them. One of the major areas, and I think is a response to the Cleveland Division of Police, is how does the training process translate to actual behavior or improvements in misconduct or improvements in community policing? How can we see that in the community? The Cleveland Division of Police often talks about, we have these new trainings, our officers have gone through training, and actually one of the discipline process at the end is that they go through training again in a particular area if there's been some misconduct there. So the question is, how effective is the training? And to be quite honest, we've done a lot of work on evaluating this process, and we still have not gotten to a space where I think the Cleveland Division of Police, the CPC, and in representing the community have agreed on what that looks like. So one of the things that we did is to hire a consultant to come in and do an independent review of the training process, program, procedures, policies, and evaluations through the CDP. This was extremely important because I had done an evaluation, having gone through a number of trainings that were, of course, believed to be subjective and biased against the CDP. So our goal with hiring an independent consultant was to bring in a voice that had no investment or tie to the CPC or the CDP to give us an evidence-based review of what would be best practices for adult learning, for measuring effectiveness, and then most importantly, to provide some insight on how we should update those training policies and actual training facilitation to make sure that we're mirroring changes in the community, but also to make sure that we're staying on top of what would be best practices in those particular areas. The training consultant identified several areas of potential and several areas of limitations within the training that was reviewed. And all the trainings were reviewed, from use of force to discipline and supervision to search and seizure, bias-free policing, and CPOP. And the recommendations from that consultant were extensive. One of the key areas that we thought was needed and then was reaffirmed by that report is that there wasn't really an evaluative process of the training and how it translates to applicable skills or impact in the community. Partially because the evaluation used by the CDP was kind of like a, did you learn something? You know, how did you think the training was? And those are unqualitative responses to something that needs to be qualified. So one of the suggestions would be to look at the policy, look at the training, and to ask the evaluation to be reflective of those. Did you understand how this policy manifests in this particular behavior and then can be translated into the community? So that was one of the first recommendations, is to improve the evaluation process. The second recommendation was to actually tackle the facilitation and delivery of the training. We understand that for the CDP, pretty much they default to OPATA. If a police officer is OPATA trained for facilitation, then they are allowed to facilitate regardless of expertise in the particular field or expertise in the subject, or even that they would be best to facilitate. And so one of the recommendations was to have an outside person train those facilitators in adult learning best practices so that the facilitation and the training would be reflective of transformative learning skills, which is, how can you actually take this information and use it day to day in making decisions and critically thinking and responding to civilians? And so that was the second one. The third issue was updating the training. So when she actually, or I should say initially conducted this particular review, the training had been going on for about 3 years at that point. And one of the things I identified was every training was exactly the same. So if you went through the training in year 1 and you went back in year 2, you essentially sat through the exact same training. So what would you learn from that? How would you evaluate what would be best practices today? And then more importantly, what would be the effect of that? If I've already seen these scenarios, if we've already processed this once, then me doing it a second time is going to be less effective. And so then that carried on into year 3. So one of the things that we encouraged was every single year updating and reflecting on what's within the training, changing the case studies that were utilized, asking more discussion-based, driven, instead of look at this, what did they do right or wrong? Taking a scenario that actually has happened that our officers would be familiar with, that would be practical for our community, and having them respond to, okay, so what can we do differently here? And we were told at the beginning of this year that all of the trainings have been updated. I'm still waiting to schedule a time to actually sit in and be a part of the new facilitation. COVID-19 has been sort of a barrier, but since we're all opening on June 2nd, because we're all clear now, right? I guess I'll be able to sit in to some degree and at least get a couple of those trainings in for review. I have advocated in the past, and now there is a new Bureau of Support Services, I believe is the title. Please correct me, Ryan or Dave, if that's not the exact title. But it is the person who has come in to replace Commander Jones, who is now Chief of Police at RTA. Their job is to facilitate the training review committee, which would provide updates on the training, would allow us to do some meaningful work there, which takes us really to the first item on our agenda. But before I do that, I want to open up for questions if there should be any. Okay, Dave, your face is always reassuring.
But no, I think you've presented a good summary that we're concerned about the evaluation of officers and the training that they get. We're concerned about the trainers themselves, and we're concerned about the evaluation of the training that they're receiving. So those are the three cornerstones of our concern. And I think the cultural problem is that the police department is in charge of itself.
Mhm.
And they have so much independence that they just drag their feet, and they make some progress here and there, but that may change someday. They may not be in charge of themselves. So
And
anyway.
thank you for making that one point. We have consistently tried to reflect the community's desire and advocacy for a civilian oversight process, or at least some independent oversight process, because, for each of us, if we're just honest with being human beings, it's very difficult to critically self-reflect and assess. This is why introspection does not work when we're trying to make changes. We have to have critical, objective point of views to give us feedback and to help push us and ask questions that we wouldn't typically ask of ourselves. I also want to make it very clear that the accountability committee is not about, firing police officers and just getting people in gotcha moments. We're really interested in the outcome. It doesn't matter if we catch 7 officers in gotcha moments if the community is still feeling unsafe, unheard, unseen, and over-policed. So at the heart of what we're doing is to try to improve community and policing relations by ensuring that the police reform process is beneficial to the community and also police officers. We want every officer to go home. And we also want every citizen to go home, no matter what their interaction has been with police. So making sure that that's clear here. So that takes us to the surveys. One of the things that we hope to do with the surveys, and Ryan, please feel free to chime in here since you did all the data collection. We noticed that the CDP, they had agreed to basically facilitate the surveys of the community to gauge a community perspective or community opinion about the police reform process. There was an initial survey conducted in 2016, and then the second one was conducted in 2018. They were 2 very different surveys that did not have the same questions, weren't written in the same language. And so from one survey to the next, it was very difficult to gauge if there was progress or not, if this was a whole new subset of individuals. Did we actually target populations who are most likely to have police interactions, or who live in communities that are over policed? And one of the things that we did identify is that didn't happen. It was 2 separate groups of individuals, and a lot of the people who took the survey were educated, financially stable professionals who, if they had interactions with the police, are more likely to have positive interactions. So we decided to develop a survey that would ask the questions the community believed were most important to assessing police reform and whether or not it's happening in a positive and progressive way. So the survey we developed, 2019, correct, Ryan? I feel like we lost the whole year. So in 2019, we did
Yes.
the initial rolling out of that survey, and we had our training consultant help with Dr. Robinson. And what we tried to do was really target youth, target people of color, and to target individuals who would have had some interaction with policing. As you can imagine, a huge undertaking, not easy to do. And we also wanted to make sure that we prevented any appearance of bias or filtering. And so we had a large amount of police actually take the survey, which I think is a good thing because it gave us difference of perspective. We were able to compare policing opinions to civilian opinions. So I'm going to let Ryan talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So with this, with our survey, we did run into some of the similar methodological issues that. So the survey that the previous 2 surveys that Commissioner Logan was talking about were both. It was from our perspective kind of a missed opportunity because those were random digit dial surveys, which by their nature lead to sort of can lead to pretty good results, but they didn't make it a longitudinal survey. They didn't have consistent questions. And so it was kind of a missed opportunity to do something that you could have actually done some really good data tracking. So that was kind of a disappointment. Now, what we put out is launching a agile survey. Those are very, very expensive, and you have to basically hire a firm to do them, because you have to have basically a callback of people. Anyway, so the survey we put out is not what you'd call a random sample survey. It was we didn't pick people at random to say, hey, take the survey. It was kind of whoever wanted to take the survey took it. So we did see some issues with the general population of the survey is a bit better educated and is whiter than the demographics of the city itself. However, because we did oversample younger people and people who had interactions with police, we have more of their perspective available. So basically, I think that the biggest conclusion that we could draw from this survey, and I apologize for my parents' neighbor's dog yapping, is that many of the questions, are you satisfied with what they're doing? People aren't sure. I think that's the biggest sort of takeaway. There are some people who have a positive opinion, some have a negative opinion, but in general, people just aren't sure. And so if I think, we have this data collected, and I think did everyone get a copy of that report? Was that sent out?
It's online. So if you go to our website, and I think it's under documents or works, you will find the survey, the results there.
Yeah, and so it's but also one of the things that our survey did that I think will be useful, and that we sort of mine more extensively in that report, are we gave people space to explain what they were thinking, what their experiences were. And because we left the survey open, and this is a decision that's challenging methodologically, but I think that's important. We left the decision open through the incidents of the series of problems we had last May, that people took an opportunity to respond to that, and it sort of does provide us that sort of contextual record for what people are thinking. And so the assessment, I think, is if you look at what we found, and if you look at the results from the previous surveys, even though they're not, we have some concerns with them. What they're finding is people are unsure, and they kind of, they're sort of a general idea of people want to see change, but they don't know if they're seeing that yet. And so so that, in a way, they're sort of, when they say, oh, of the people who responded to the question, more than half said that the police are doing a good job. Yeah, but only 25%, only half of people responded. The rest of people said, I don't know enough to say anything. And so that's not like a mark of confidence. I don't think. I don't think if you're seeing, if you're, I don't know, that was just sort of the assessment that I got from going through it. And if you want to read the whole report, it breaks everything down, and it's kind of long, but it gives some pretty good sort of respondents' perspectives on what they saw and how they feel, and also gives some specific instance of when police behave in a way that citizens don't like, basically. So.
Thank you. And I think what's important there too is one of the things that when we discussed the training, we had some of the same feedback from the community is, I'm not really sure what I should be looking for in the training to link it to what I'm seeing in the community. And I think that is a failing on the part of the CDP, and where we need to do more work is breaking down these very complicated documents and complicated processes so that people can understand what they should expect. It should be very clear how a community member should assess community and problem-oriented policing, considering that the entire policy is about how police will interact with civilians. So if you can't see how that plays out in your community or how that plays out in your individual interactions, it's because it's ambiguous, and being ambiguous leads to not having a way to evaluate if it's working or not. So I look at this, I'm not sure, as an opportunity for us to educate the community, but also to make some stronger recommendations about how these policies and procedures and training should be more reflective of community engagement, community education, and community involvement. And the other point that you make that I thought was really important is it isn't that the surveys before were just, we didn't collect any information. It's just hard to track progress over time if we're all using different surveys, they're not consistent. So our goal with creating this survey was to every single year use the exact same survey. Whatever results come, we will welcome, because we're not looking for negative results or positive results. We're looking for what the community actually thinks as point in time to compare to what happened last year. We were intentional about leaving the survey open during the social justice and racial unrest for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, because it is reflective of what is happening in our community. We, as the CPC, just signed a document to request that the Tamir Rice case be reopened by the Department of Justice, because we believe that enforcing and supporting and investing in accountability at all levels is important. We cannot say that we've made progress if we have no measurement, if we have no change that we can actually see on the ground. So I just want to make sure that we're tying all that in. The surveys aren't just to capture data, it's so that we can look, okay, there's issues here. Where's the training for that? Where's the policy for that? What recommendations are necessary? Any comments?
Yeah, I do. What are the plans to repeat the survey? And if
Yes.
there were methodological problems with it, can they be corrected? Or if they were corrected, then it would defeat the purpose of presenting the same survey.
Right. So that's what we're going to discuss today, is when we're rolling the survey out. Again, we were trying to wait for the new orders, because I think it's helpful to be in person and talk to people about the survey, not answering questions about like how to answer, but just to provide some feedback on what we're trying to capture. And we've had just better results with that. So we are going to set a time for that, but I will let Ryan speak to the methodology.
Yeah, the methodology things that we're doing are methodological limitations, not methodological problems, because we are limited by just the nature of the questions we're asking, and we're limited by the means in which we have to collect this data. So that's just sort of this is the best we can with the means. We simply have to acknowledge these are our limitations with the data. That we discussed.
And Ryan,
sorry.
The problem with surveys when you're dealing with the Cleveland Division of Police, and the monitor said this at the last status conference hearing, is the division will never read the responses. They'll just attack the methodology, and no matter what you use, there's no perfect way to do it. So no matter what survey approach you use, they always attack the methodology instead of looking at what data might be revealed. The latest example being the monitoring team conducting a sample of the participants at May 30th events. It was a small sample. They acknowledged the methodological problems, and the division called it garbage, and they didn't take any of the knowledge from it because of that. So the biggest thing is we're the only one polling for data. The monitoring team hasn't conducted their biannual survey. I've followed up on that question several times when they're going to do it again. We're moving into, this is the third year, so it was due last year. They decided not to do it, and we're supposed to be a part of that process. So, it's mostly for the community. The problem with our surveys is if hopefully maybe next year we'll get an administration that cares about the answers, but, this is mostly for community knowledge, and depending on what group reads it, you can always throw stones at any survey, but hopefully someone somewhere most importantly, the community members will gain some knowledge from it.
But I think too is I don't want to paint this as a negative process either. The point of having the surveys facilitated by CPC is to create consistency. And because we're using the same survey each year, we will have consistent results. If they favor the CDP's police reform process, okay. If they don't, okay. The idea isn't about the CDP and if they read our responses. Our job is to advocate for the community. And if the community provides answers to this survey that gives us an opportunity to advocate for them to make recommendations, to open up new lines of discussion, I think that that's the purpose of the survey. So I don't think we need to get worried about other people's reports. Our goal is to focus on our responsibility to the community. So we will roll out the survey. Like I said, I know that Governor DeWine has decided we're opening June 2nd. My question really, I guess, to Jason would be, what is the conversation or statement from the city in terms of having a public meeting?
So far, there's been none. So we have no official communications from the bosses. I think it's just been what I've seen so far. Nobody's doing it. So maybe after June 2nd, we'll see a dramatic increase in public meetings. But so far, every community meeting that's on the level of an organization like ours is remaining digital. We do have the option to do some outdoor meetings, which might be something we can do as well. I think we're going to experiment with that a little in June. But my fear is we don't want to be the first ones to dive into full person meetings because I really don't think people are ready for it, quite frankly. I have no indication that nobody's calling us and screaming and saying, when are we having live meetings again? People are very comfortable being safe still. So.
Well, and I also think that meetings like this is much more convenient for the participants. They don't have to travel. And I think that figures into it too. Besides not feeling safe, I think we've gotten kind of hooked on this virtual platform that allows us to meet, make decisions, plan, strategize, and sit at home and drink some tonic water.
So, and I definitely think that everyone who has access to a computer and internet feels that way. But we have a lot of people who don't necessarily have access to do those things. And so my thought with that is a lot of individuals who come in contact with police would be individuals who wouldn't necessarily have in-home access to actually engage in the way that some of us with a little bit more privilege do. So I want to at least take into consideration what would be our plan for outreaching on both levels. I am in no way encouraging us to do something that would lead to increases in cases and illness, but I do think that, we have met outside. It is warm. We are moving into the summer seasons. There are parks where we could safely, offer the option for people to come and get paper surveys to complete or something, but we need to consider that because if we could just treat this like everybody has access, then we are part of the problem at that point. So either we're going to do a mailing of surveys or we're going to do something to make sure that we're reaching out. The other area of that is one of the most beneficial focus groups I think the CDP actually hosted with the monitoring team was within the jail. And they gave us good feedback on their thoughts with police interactions, and it was never followed up on. And I think it would be wise for us to offer individuals waiting who just are in the jails, nobody's convicted yet, but just who are in the jails, who have had recent contact with police to do those surveys, and they will not have access to computers. So just thinking how we can maximize getting everyone the opportunity to participate fairly. So I am thinking that probably why not create social media pages for this group and make videos addressing one issue or advertising each one. We do have social media for our page. And so that is definitely something that we did with the last issuing of the survey is I did a video to recruit people to complete the survey. We had all kinds of links on Twitter and various social media platforms. So we will do that again. But like I said, it's important to me to not think from a place of privilege and to always think about everybody is coming from different walks of life and providing access to anyone who would want to engage. So I'm thinking we're heading into that space. I would like to have the surveys set to be released no later than July. Last time we did this, we had the results. I think we went into mid-September, and that was really good for us because that's when we're rounding up our end of year report. We're doing a lot of things that will take us into the next year's plan for the consent decree work. So are there any other thoughts or opinions about that?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Um, I was just thinking about everything that you all are saying and about accessibility and everything of that nature. And I think, not to think too far ahead, but as we're talking about it, this can't be a this or that conversation in terms of accessibility. It has to be a this and conversation. So the idea of having in person, as long as it's done safely, obviously, as we're still in the middle of a pandemic, regardless of what guidelines are being given to us, I think having in person and distance is good because um, as you mentioned, um, there are individuals who don't have access, and we have privilege of getting Wi-Fi and having computers and technology to talk to one another this way. But I also think from an accessibility standpoint as well for our differently abled community, maybe they can't get outside. Maybe being virtual is, the best option for them. So I think we really need to figure out what what are some ways where we can encompass all these different types of modes of getting information out and distributing a survey? Do we have stacks of paper that we give at the in-person? Do we have a QR code that we also can have for someone who wants to take it on their cell phone? Do we have a link that we can blast in an email, put on an e-flyer? Do we put a QR code or something like on a flyer on a piece of paper around the city? Like those are all things we need to think about because accessibility is important, especially for our differently abled populations, especially for those who are blind, deaf, physically differently abled. They are intellectually different and everything like that in terms of the norm. So just thinking about that because their voices and opinions on policing, police training are also very important because if we don't seek out their answers or what their stance is, we're not going to get the full picture on how our community feels about how our police are being trained or how our police are interacting with our community. So just listening, and I just wanted to bring that up to you all so we all like had a greater idea of how we need to reach to, communities who can't hear. Like, are we gonna have interpreters? Are we gonna have closed captions? Like that's things we need to think about. And are we gonna put pronouns for our LGBTQ so they know that we're with them as a community as well? So just pointing that out a little bit.
Absolutely, and thank you. And the question in the chat, how did we do this before for people who needed printouts? We actually delivered a lot of surveys to different locations to make sure that there was some accessibility for those who didn't come to our meetings, didn't come to our office, or did not have access to internet. I think the other point too is I'm not sure how we addressed potentially vision or hearing impaired civilians or officers who might want to take the survey. And I do know that the city of Cleveland has access to interpreters as well as, really every single accommodation can be made through the city. So I think it would be just tapping into the department with the city of Cleveland, because I know when we did the surveys for CPOP, they had Mandarin interpreters. They had the survey actually in Mandarin. They had, and I went to the one that there in the Asian community. So it was a Mandarin, Chinese, Korean speaking interpreters there, and each survey was in their respective languages. So I'm sure we can do that. But again, I don't know how we can do that in a home That is a good question. That's a thing that did happen in the public, because they had to let us know these are my needs. So I'm not sure how to fully answer that question right now, but I do know that it is possible because I've seen the city do it with the other surveys that were conducted. So maybe that's just Jason or Ryan following up with someone at the city who handles that particular like interpretation, ADA and other needs.
We'll do our best to design a program that reaches everyone we can based on who we want to reach. I mean, so if it's just going to be anyone can take it like it was before, we'll do what we can to reach everybody through
Of
print,
course.
mails. We'll do some stuff. So we have the timeline. You want it by July. We'll have a meeting and come up with it. So
Okay.
I'm not overly concerned. The translation issue, though, we did hit a roadblock with that on our past surveys. It's not feasible for us within our budget to do it, and the city is uncooperative. So there are some goals that might be too far, and you know how it is working with the city. It's not like they're just going to quickly and expeditiously find us translators and give us access to the same resources the division had to have one in Chinese. So we dropped that the last time because it was just not accessible for us with the resources we have under the current city system.
This is what I'm recommending though, because the city cannot deny assisting a civilian. So if we have contact of who's responsible or whose department interpreters fall under, we can put that information on the surveys and they can call and ask for an interpreter. And that is the responsibility of the city to every single civilian who lives in the city. So it isn't
sure, we can certainly do that. Absolutely. Absolutely.
To facilitate it.
Yeah, I have a question for Samantha. You have to help an old fella here with what are QR codes or?
Yeah, so and you're young. We're all young here. QR codes are I don't know the technical, what QR stands for, but QR codes are essentially something you can scan with your phone. Unless Ryan knows, because he's tech, he knows tech really much better than me. It's just a code you can scan with your phone if you have the capabilities, and it's like a link that you take a picture of, and it allows to take you to wherever. So you can.
So it could take you to the survey.
Yeah. So you just use
Thank you, Cruz.
Yeah. So like you just use your camera and you hold down the QR code on your phone instead of taking an actual picture, and it will literally open up whatever web browser on your phone or what device you're using, and it allows you to go straight to that survey. Instead of clicking an actual link, you just kind of click a picture of it. So
I see. Thank you.
Actually, we were going. COVID hit right as we were starting to distribute this stuff. The paper survey have a QR code on it, and the little flyers we were going to put around did have a QR code on it. But then COVID happened, and we got to one site where we got to deliver stuff before they. Yeah.
Okay. So we definitely can do that. And then if there are additional suggestions with that, I just want to be mindful of time. We only have about 18 more minutes. And I do want to at least pose these questions that maybe if we have to wait till next time to review, but all suggestions on how to facilitate the implementation of the survey are welcome. You can email me directly. You can email Ryan or Jason. We're open to feedback and making sure that it is as seamless as we can be during a pandemic. So thank you for everybody's feedback. The second item on our agenda is the Training Review Committee. And we have not met in quite some time, and I'm not sure what is going to happen moving forward. Like I said, the person who filled Commander Jones' spot is newly in. I know she's offered to assist with supporting his training and making sure that he's aware of what we were doing. So I think we're just waiting for him to get acclimated to everything that was going on with the Training Review Committee. And then hopefully we'll restart. We need to restart this because district awareness, neighborhood training is something that is still not complete from the consent decree, and something that is really important to the community because it really helps in East District to help police officers understand the important demographic, the needs, how to engage with some of the individuals there based on population numbers, and just in general tips and resources in the community. So as soon as we receive an update on that date, I will make sure to give it to you, and then of course provide review of what we covered. The last thing I want to cover is police misconduct. So we spent the last couple of meetings talking a lot about qualified immunity, and I've sent so many resources to you. And in the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of changes or conversations at the federal level, and I kind of felt like we were getting away from on the ground accountability and on the ground assessment of police misconduct and making recommendations that don't necessarily need legislation. And so I wanted to pose these 3 questions that I think are important to some of the issues that we've seen. So I'll give the example of, let's say the officer who was fired. The incident stemmed from 2018, where he put his foot on the neck of the unarmed individual on the ground while 4 other officers witnessed this. His superior was aware of it, but it didn't come to light until review of body camera footage. What's important there is the officer was fired, but criminal charges were not pursued, and the other officers simply were disciplined. And I was thinking as I read that story the first time, what could be potential coaching or supervision post that incident that would make me feel that these officers should continue wearing a badge? And I couldn't necessarily come up with anything. And so every time I think about what's the post conduct or post follow-up to police officers engaging in misconduct, I never feel that we have good footing. And so I wanted to pose it to the community. What would be tangible or meaningful steps to addressing post misconduct in a way that we think would lead to some actual accountability? So the first question I have is, what are community expectations to include in post-discipline coaching / supervision? The reason I have it written as coaching / supervision is because the Cleveland Division of Police just released a new coaching mentoring process within the division, where they're going to identify stellar supervisors to serve in these mentor roles to help officers out. So what would we think? And we may not come up with anything today, but I just want to pose that question. What would we think would be coaching and supervision? So some cases, the only thing that happens is discipline. They get a 2-week suspension and then they come back. So that's not really accountability, that's discipline. So accountability would be addressing the issue so that we hopefully prevent it from happening again. And hopefully we're all on the same page that discipline does not deter misconduct. Hopefully we know that. Okay, so thinking about what would be post-discipline coaching and supervision that we think would lead to change behavior, culture shift, improved policing, or training people out. I am in the social work field, and my first mentor always told me his obligation was to train me up or train me out. And I appreciated that. And so I think that's the approach for policing too. If we're going to allow people who've engaged in police misconduct, what would be the expectation of that post-discipline coaching or supervision? That's the first question. And I think, is there a chat question? Yes, in post-discipline coaching, supervision. It could be mentoring too. It could be mentoring. I think the division sees mentoring differently. They see mentoring as a way to help people move up. And I'm not sure I would want someone who's coming off of discipline to engage in a progressive plan to get a promotion. So That's why I'm using the coaching and supervision, because that's specifically what they use. Specifically what they use in their new plan. Great question, James. Related to the surveys, we could study ways the community was made aware of the survey. Then we could also analyze if they had the desire, what's in it for them to complete the survey. Once we have that information, we could pinpoint ways to increase awareness and desire to complete the new survey. For post-discipline coaching, I think there needs to be transparency to the community on progress of the offending individual. That's a really interesting point. How would we track progress in the officer? Before we can track progress, we would have to set an expectation. So that's what this question is really going to, is what would be the expectations of post-discipline coaching / supervision? What would we like to see? What would we expect the conversations to be? Do we think that there should be a training component? Should there be an essay component? I know people might not like that, but essays help to understand the state of mind of a person. Should there be a follow-up with, like with us or with the Civilian Review Board, where they do, some sort of, I don't know, conversation, mediation, support, something to that degree. I'm not sure. I'm posing that to you all.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm addressing exactly your question, but the disciplinary matrices, group 1, group 2, group 3, they're all punitive. And there's, it's like our criminal justice system. It's a punitive system, not a restorative system. And what you're talking about, and so one of my thoughts is that those disciplinary matrices should be revised to include this sort of thing, so that a letter of reinstruction, or a verbal reprimand, or 1-day suspension. I mean, these are all punishments. And
Right.
if we had a different, another column that were more restorative or helpful coaching, mentoring, that sort of thing, that would be important, because when the CPRB makes a sustained finding, they look to the 3 groups and recommend a punishment. That's all they have available to them. So it seems to me that part and parcel to all of this is that the disciplinary matrices need to be changed or modified, revised, or what have you, to include things like this as alternatives to punishment.
I agree with you. And so I wrote that down, and that's something for us to explore. If you've not read the GPO, the Discipline GPO, it is on our website. Take a look at it. It's very, like Dave said, it's strictly just about, if you do this, here are the punishments. But there isn't any idea about, you did this, but what's corrective action as opposed to just disciplinary action. So I like the idea of restorative coaching or restorative training. Yes, Ms. Samantha.
So Commissioner Logan, or honestly anyone who can answer it for me, the CPC, the Community Police Commission, as you know, they it is only existing until the completion of the consent decree, yes?
Hopefully not.
Right, no, hopefully not.
Per the consent decree, yes.
Per the consent decree. Okay, so hopefully not. In a perfect world, this will exist forever and ever in all eternity, and Cleveland wouldn't, just delete it, right? But, say Cleveland does. I guess what I'm asking is are we, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, the police department really governs itself. It runs itself. It's accountable to itself. So therefore, it's not really accountable at all. So I guess my question is, we have all this stuff implemented. How are we going to ensure that they're doing this properly and to the standards of the community? Because if the commissioners or the chiefs or anybody doesn't want to do it, they're not going to do it. So how do we ensure that the perpetuity of this training of these questions hopefully doesn't outlive the CPC, but if it does, how do we ensure that will occur and happen? And I like the questions, Commissioner Logan, that you're asking and what the goals are. But I guess I'm also just concerned again about who's going to uphold the police department to this standard if they don't really care what the community has to say. Because they don't have to, because they show us that they don't. I hope my question and or statement is making sense. But I
Mhm.
guess like just how are we going to keep this afloat is my question. How are we going to continue this? How are we going to keep it around, and how are we going to truly enforce it? And how are we going to make sure they want to do this coaching and mentoring? Because honestly, like I I have it in my head and I just can't get it out. But
I understand what your question is, and I want to say this, as a person who has volunteered hundreds of hours, invested in more than one goal, improving policing in our community, sometimes it can get a bit overwhelming and you can feel like, well, what are we doing? But that's why we're leaders in this, because we believe that the investment we're making will have a return. Now, we're not legislators, we're not Judge Oliver, so there are certain things that we cannot mandate and we cannot force to happen. But what we have at our disposal at this particular point in time is that the CPC is here. There is a judge presiding over the consent decree. The consent decree has not been met. The power is in the community. So if the community gets more invested, which I think is necessary, through not just the CPC, but also in some of the other committees that exist outside of the CPC that are working to ensure that there is some type of commission long after the consent decree is over. I think the bigger question is, do we believe that police reform has an endpoint? And if we think it does, then that is the wrong frame of mind. Reform is an ongoing process that should happen every single year, quarterly for evaluations, constant assessment, constant updating. So if we're not of the mind that that's the way this process should go, then I think you're right. No one will do it. Each of us has to decide for ourselves why we are doing this. I truly believe that the investment I've made here is not only a necessary investment, but will have some impact in the long run. I am hopeful that the community will vote to keep the commission, but if it doesn't, then that's our responsibility too. Because if you're a voting member in the city of Cleveland and you're not holding your city council members accountable to their oversight of the CDP, including their budget, including how many officers there are, if you're not holding the mayor accountable, then, it all plays a part. We are all one prong of this huge entity to make police reform happen. So that's what I would say, because I can't see into the future.
Yeah.
And I think this is the way that we need to approach it. Dave?
that's a great answer. And I
Yeah.
recognize that it's a really big thing.
It's okay.
My WebEx cut out for a little bit, so I'm not sure, Latoya, that you mentioned this, but there is a movement afoot to have a ballot initiative, a charter amendment that would put the community in charge. It would be a significant system change. I mean, an extremely great kind of overhaul of the system that puts the community in charge. So we have to work hard to see that this charter amendment gets on the ballot and that it passes.
Right. So civic engagement, that's what I would say. On racial justice, on gender equality, every aspect of oppression requires civic engagement in order for us to make progress and see some form of social justice. So it is 4:57, and I believe you have the other two questions. We won't be able to tease them out as much because I need to end at 5 o'clock. But if you have any current questions that you want to ask right now, please feel free to do so. If not, please email me. I would be happy to look over any of your suggestions and respond to you. You can also email Ryan because I rely a lot on him in terms of a lot of the reports that we're doing, specifically the data collection. And I would say email Dave, but Dave gets 1,001 emails from so many organizations he's on. But if you have questions, I would be happy to send those to Dave. So are there any questions at this point about anything that we've covered, or perhaps something that you'd like us to discuss at the next meeting?
I was just going to jump in real quick and suggest that, one of the things that I've been looking at is that a lot of how cities are dealing with a part of accountability is transparency. And one of the cities that's doing a really good job with that so far is the city of New Orleans, including documenting every single interaction between a citizen and an officer, and including demographics and all that stuff. So I think that that's one area I think we could really push. So.
Oh, and I'll just throw this in. If any of you are not aware of it, but the Ohio legislature in a bipartisan way has dropped a bail reform bill. So it looks like bail reform is coming to Ohio.
And we should be really happy because one of our former commissioners has done a lot of work with bail reform, and one of our most active members, so that would be Anthony Body and Kareem Hinton. So a lot of that stems from the work here and the work in the community. So we should be very, I would say, excited about that because I am, right? Isn't it about time? So with that, I want to thank you for joining tonight. I appreciate, as always, your time. I know that we're all extremely busy and sometimes overwhelmed with what's going on in the world. So make sure that you are taking care of yourselves as you are trying to take care of others, and have a wonderful and safe rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.